Alright, so we are ready to start sewing our length of woven cattail leaves to start forming a hat. And so basically, what we'll need to do is, start out and make sure you get a decent amount of length. And as you sew, you can always add additional leaves into your braid or your plate as you go along as needed. So you can braid out a whole bunch, and then hopefully that'll be enough to form your whole entire hat. Or you can kind of add as you go based on the length. The first thing you'll need to do though is to measure the circumference of your head just above your ears, so that you'll know how far out to sew before you start forming the actual size of the hat, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But first, what I'm going to do is you're going to get some thread or some fibers, and I've got some flat waxed nylon here, what they also call artificial sinew, and I usually get about 6 feet basically, and 6 maybe 9 feet of it to start. For me, that's both of my arm spans, and then a half of one arm span approximately. So I'm just going to grab some scissors here, and what I want to do with this is this flat artificial sinew is really easy to split, and I don't have to do this, but I want to do this because I don't want like a large what I'll call a thread print when we sew this. So I just want a smaller thread print. So I want smaller thread that's visible on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and split this, and that way maybe I only need this amount of length, and I don't have to waste or use more extra thread than I need to. So I'm gonna the flat artificial sinew or waxed nylon splits a lot easier than the round. So we're just gonna go ahead and split this up. Okay, and what you can then do is you can kind of twirl it between your fingers to kind of round it out a little bit. Okay, but this side here, I'm not going to use this, I'm going to use the other side, so I can just kind of put this aside. Alright, so here I've got my needles, and I want a fairly large needle. I'm not sure what gauge or size needle these are, but these are big needles. Okay, so about that big, just to give you a reference, almost about the length of my thumb. Okay, so again, these are craft needles, I would say, and something pretty heavy duty, but not too big, not too thick rather. So basically I can go ahead and I can thread, put my, just basically thread the needle, and I'm just going to use one strand. So you thread a little bit out. You thread a little bit out, and a trick that I've learned was that on the standing end or the longer end of your thread, because this is the shorter part that I just threaded through, you can work your needle through between the fibers once, and then pull up like this. You can do it once or twice, and then what will happen is that'll lock the needle or the thread onto the eye of the needle, so that you don't have to, and you can go ahead and kind of pull this up to the needle, and what that'll do is that'll lock this onto the needle, so that your shorter end right here, the shorter end doesn't come out from the eye of the needle. So that's kind of a nifty little trick there. So this is kind of locked on there. So that was a cool thing that I learned. And you don't necessarily have to put a knot in the end. I'm not going to do it this time, but you can if you'd like. So let's get sewing. So hopefully I don't get too far off camera with this, a little awkward. So essentially, I want to pick a side that's going to be outside or inside, and I think this side I'm going to choose to make the outside. The splices happen to be on the inside of these. So here's a place where there's a splice here, and I want that on the inside of the hat. So I'm gonna start sewing on the opposite side here. All right, so there's a reason why we put our bend in first. All right, and that's just so that we can kind of slightly overlap. Okay, and I want to start to sew. I want to start to stitch this around so that it goes around in this direction. All right, so what I can do is I'm going to start at the crease at the top, and I basically want to take my needle and I'm going to go find an area and just kind of pierce through the needle, pierce through both layers. Use my fingers like so, and kind of just pull this through, but not all the way. And then I'm gonna go down through both sides a little bit after that. Again, be careful not to pull through all the way, because right now this will slip right through. And then go back up the same hole again to kind of lock this off. Okay. So we got this, and now I can kind of put a little tension on that to tighten it up. And then one more time down. And that'll be our anchor point. And that way we don't have to put a knot in there. Let's see here, almost getting tangled up here. There we go. Like so. Okay, and then I want to come up. I want to go up a little bit from my first stitch and pierce, make sure I'm going through both layers. Okay. And then I'm here like this. Now I want to go back just where I went in the last time on the first stitch. Okay, just like that. Pull that in like that. Okay, flip it over. Okay, I can go find another spot and go down a little further. Make sure I'm going through both layers. And then find where I started my last stitch and go down back through that hole. So what we start to do is we start to have this this nice stitch that looks like a like regular sewing machine stitch. Flip this over, and now I'm kind of behind where I started on the other side, and I just kind of march down and go to another length, pierce through both layers, and then flip it over, find where I entered in the last stitch here. Let me get real close up here if I can, and then go down through both layers. And then flip over. So this is what we're going to do. This stitch is how we're going to do for until we get down to the 5 strands. Because if you remember, this is where we had our 2-leaf 4 strands. Okay, so one side is both sides are relatively flat till we start doing 5 strands, where you start to have the elbows or the ears or the edges here. Then we're going to change up our stitch pattern. So I just want to continue doing this for a while. Just to anchor everything in, excuse me, just to anchor everything in place. Make sure you're going through both layers. Okay. We're about to make a turn. So now I can, on this side I'm going underneath one of the stitches just to make sure that the chain in place and they stay in line. At least, you know, both sides look pretty uniform. That's what I'm going after. Like so, and then right at the tip here, be careful not to poke yourself. Like so. And then here, excuse me. And then right here, where I just came out the last hole, I want to go down into that hole, or at the end of the last stitch. Okay, so now as we've got this stitch down. Okay, and what we'll want to do is we'll want to start to work this around as we stitch. Okay, so you can start to see, and we want it to keep it flat. Okay, we're going to basically make a flat disc as we stitch. Okay, so essentially we want something like this, but they'll be stitched down, and we want it flat, and we want to keep going and making it flat until it's the same circumference as the circumference of our head measurement. All right, so we want to keep it flat. We keep stitching flat until it's the same circumference as the circumference of our head measurement, just above our ears, from above our brow all the way around to the top of our ears. Okay, so we're going to continue that stitch until we're ready to change up the next stitch